I never cared much for money. Sounds like a lie, right? But really, I was content with a good book, an old record playing in the background, and my grandfather's watch ticking away softly on my wrist. That watch, leather band worn thin, the face slightly cracked, was the only thing I asked for when my father passed away. Not the company, not the estate, just the watch. Because while my stepbrother Daniel was busy counting projected dividends and calculating his future net worth on the back of cocktail napkins, I was watching the seconds slip by, trying to make sense of a man I never fully understood. My name's Luke. I'm 29 now, but this story really begins when I was 17. That's when Dad remarried. I don't want to sound like the bitter stepchild, because I wasn't. Not at first. I gave Marlene, my stepmother, the benefit of the doubt. She was charming in that refined, country club kind of way. Her smiles were always just a second too late, her hugs a touch too rehearsed. And Daniel? Well, he was already 19 when our parents got married. Older by 2 years, and somehow already acting like he was royalty while I was the groundskeeper's kid. To be fair, Daniel and I never fought. Not directly. It was more like an ongoing Cold War. His jabs were subtle, almost masterful. He'd flash his Rolex and casually ask what model my hand-me-down watch was. He once offered me one of his ties for a college interview, then laughed when I thanked him and said, "No worries. It's not like I wear polyester anymore." That kind of thing. He had a way of making you feel small without ever raising his voice. My dad, Andrew Whitaker, was old money. Think generational wealth, but with a work ethic that never really died. He could have lived off trust fund interest, but instead he built an $80 million logistics empire from scratch. Warehousing, freight, global contracts. The kind of boring stuff that prints money while everyone else is too busy trying to make their startup go viral. He was proud of his success, but prouder that he did it without relying on his family's wealth. That meant something to him. Legacy, hard work, character. And yet somehow, when it came to family, he had a blind spot the size of Montana. See, after he married Marlene, the atmosphere in our house started to shift. Slowly at first. A changed seating arrangement at dinner. New art replacing the old portraits. The fireplace mantel, once home to family photos and childhood crafts, was now lined with modern sculptures and designer candles. Dad didn't seem to notice, or maybe he didn't care. He was smitten with Marlene. She made him feel young again, I guess. Or maybe she just knew how to stroke his ego in the right places. It wasn't long before Daniel moved into the guest house. That should have been fine. He was in college, supposedly studying business. But the way he acted? You'd think he owned the place. He'd throw parties and complain about the noise level in the main house. He'd leave his laundry with the staff and act surprised if it wasn't folded to his liking. He even asked the landscaper once to trim the hedges more symmetrically. This isn't a jungle safari. The worst part? Dad gave him a role at the company. At first, it was just a summer internship. But by the time I finished high school, Daniel had a title, Strategic Development Liaison, which basically meant he sat in on meetings, said vague things like, "Let's circle back to this," and took credit for other people's work. I asked Dad once, just once, if I could intern in accounting. Not even paid. Just experience. He gave me a tight smile and said, "Luke, you're a smart kid. You don't need to rely on family. Find your own path." That stung. I wanted to scream. "I'm not relying on you. I'm asking to learn from you." But I just nodded and said, "Okay." College was my escape. I went to a small liberal arts school upstate, majored in philosophy, of all things. Not exactly a direct pipeline to generational wealth, but I loved it. I loved thinking deeply, questioning everything, exploring ethics and logic and the meaning of existence. Meanwhile, Daniel dropped out 2 years in and still somehow got promoted. The title changed to Executive Vice President of Global Strategy, which was hilarious considering he couldn't locate Singapore on a map. I didn't come home much. Thanksgiving, sometimes Christmas. The mansion always felt colder than I remembered. Marlene had replaced most of the staff with people she trusted more, which just meant people who answered to her instead of Dad. The cook who used to sneak me peanut butter cookies after school? Gone. The housekeeper who taught me how to sew a button? Gone. All replaced by polished professionals in matching uniforms who smiled without warmth. Dad aged fast in those years. Stress, maybe. Or just the weight of knowing time was catching up. He started talking more about legacy during our calls. How important it was that the company lived on. How proud he was of Daniel's business sense. And me? He told me he was proud that I was doing what I loved, even if he didn't understand it. That felt like code for "you're not part of this world." Then, a year ago, everything changed. I was back for Christmas. The house was as sterile as ever. Glassy white floors, imported Italian furniture that looked more like art than something you could actually sit on. Daniel greeted me with that classic smirk and a clap on the back. "Still chasing your dreams, huh?" he said, eyeing my worn leather boots and faded jacket. "Still pretending you earned any of this?" I replied casually. He laughed like I was joking. Dinner was a silent performance. Forks clinking, crystal glasses filled with wine I couldn't pronounce. Dad looked tired, pale. His suit hung a little too loose. I noticed his hands trembling slightly when he reached for the salt. No one else seemed to care. After dinner, he asked to speak to me alone in the library. It was the only room that still looked the same. Same bookshelves, same armchairs, same faint smell of pipe tobacco. He closed the door behind us and sat down slowly. "I'm making some changes," he said, voice low. "To the will." I asked. He didn't flinch. "I've already made them," he said. "I just wanted you to know. You'll understand when the time comes. And whatever happens, don't let it change who you are. You're not like them." It was cryptic, but heartfelt. I wanted to ask more, but something told me not to press. He looked like a man who'd made peace with a difficult decision. He died 3 weeks later. The funeral was massive. Half the city's elite showed up. Politicians, CEOs, foreign dignitaries. Daniel gave a speech that sounded like it was written by ChatGPT on legacy and leadership. Marlene wore black designer sunglasses and dabbed at her eyes like a soap opera widow. I stood in the back and just tried to breathe. Then came the reading of the will. I didn't even want to go. I figured Daniel would get the company, the properties, the accounts, the cars. All of it. Marlene would get whatever was left. And me? Maybe a nod in the obituary. Maybe a framed photo. But the lawyer insisted I attend. Said my name was mentioned more than once. So I showed up. Sat in the back of the mahogany-paneled conference room while Daniel strolled in like he was early for his own coronation. Marlene sat beside him, all pearls and perfume. She gave me a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. Daniel leaned over and muttered, "You can keep your old man's watch. I'll handle the rest." I didn't respond. Just leaned back in my chair and watched the lawyer open the file. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began to read. The first few pages were predictable. Donations to charity. A few generous gifts to longtime employees. A scholarship fund in Dad's name. Then it got interesting. To my beloved stepson, Daniel. Daniel straightened in his chair. "I leave a trust fund in the amount of $500,000 to be managed by the estate for his continued development." Daniel blinked, then smiled, assuming more was coming. "To my wife, Marlene." She sat up straighter. "I leave the summer home in Nantucket, as well as a one-time cash gift of $2 million. There was a beat of silence. Daniel looked confused. Marlene's brow furrowed. Then the lawyer flipped to the final page. "And to my son, Luke Whitaker." I held my breath. "I leave full ownership and controlling interest of Whitaker Global Logistics, including all assets, subsidiaries, properties, and associated trusts. This decision is made with confidence and clarity, knowing he alone carries the values upon which this company was built." Silence. The heir left the room. Daniel's smirk vanished. "And Marlene?" She leaned forward, voice trembling. "No, this has to be a mistake." The lawyer didn't even look up. "It's not." And that was just the beginning. I didn't say a word. Not when Daniel's mouth hung open like a malfunctioning puppet. Not when Marlene tried to argue with the lawyer, demanding he go back and check again. Not even when she accused me of manipulating my father in his final days, like I was some scheming villain out of a daytime soap. I just sat there, silent, holding the watch on my wrist like it was an anchor keeping me from floating away in the storm of disbelief, fury, and confusion that erupted around me. The meeting ended awkwardly. No champagne toast. No victory lap. Just Daniel storming out, his polished shoes squeaking on the marble floors, and Marlene clenching her pearls like they were rosary beads. The lawyer handed me a thick folder of documents and whispered, "Your father was very deliberate." Then he left, as if he'd just dropped a grenade, and walked away before it went off. I sat in the car for nearly 20 minutes before driving away. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I didn't feel victorious. Honestly, I felt numb. Like I was wearing someone else's skin. Was this what Dad meant in the library? That I'd understand when the time came? I had so many questions, and the only man who could answer them was now a framed photo on the fireplace. The following weeks were surreal. Overnight, I went from being the quiet son with the old watch to the CEO of a sprawling logistics empire. The office building had a wing named after my father. The staff treated me with the kind of cautious respect normally reserved for royalty or celebrities. Every handshake came with a curious glance, every greeting tinted with disbelief. I wasn't supposed to be here. Everyone knew it, including me. Daniel didn't take it well. He started showing up to the office, uninvited, unannounced, and increasingly aggressive. The first time, he tried to barge into my office like he still worked there. "You can't seriously expect me to believe this is permanent," he said, throwing his arms out like the company walls were some kind of prank. Dad must have been out of his mind. This was supposed to go to me. I stared at him across the desk. Calm. Collected. The way Dad used to look at reporters when they asked him dumb questions. "It's already done, Daniel," I said. "I'm just trying to understand what he wanted and do right by it." He leaned forward, voice dropping. "You think you can run this place? You majored in philosophy, Luke. You spent 4 years writing essays about Plato while I was building this company from the inside." I almost laughed. "You mean sitting in meetings and skimming profit reports while interns did the work?" He slammed his palm on the desk. "You think you deserve this more than me?" And that was the thing, wasn't it? I didn't. I never said I did. But my father did. And he was the only vote that counted. I didn't hear from him for 2 weeks after that. Then the real games began. First, it was the rumor mill. I started hearing whispers from board members, questions about my leadership, my lack of experience, suggestions that maybe a co-chair position should be created to help guide the transition. I knew exactly where it came from. Daniel still had friends on the board. Old golfing buddies of Dad's, drinking partners, people who owed Marlene favors. They started circling like vultures, hoping I'd fumble. Then came the media leaks. A strange son inherits $80 million empire. Family furious over shocking will. That headline ran in 3 business blogs the same week. Suddenly, I was fielding questions from journalists and dodging cameras outside the building. Marlene, ever the PR queen, released a statement calling the will unexpected and uncharacteristic of Andrew's values. Daniel did a podcast interview where he said, "I always believed family meant trust. But lately, I'm not so sure." He didn't mention me by name, but the implication was loud and clear. And through all of it, I tried to stay quiet. I threw myself into learning the business. I met with every department head, asked questions, listened. I stayed late, went home exhausted, and started dreaming in spreadsheets. I even found Dad's old notebooks in the office safe, half filled with scribbles, ideas, even handwritten notes about people he trusted and didn't. On one page, underlined twice, was a simple sentence: "Daniel doesn't build. He takes." That's when it hit me. Dad didn't just leave the company to me out of affection. He left it to protect it. But the house, that was another story. See, I hadn't been back to the mansion since the funeral. Part of me didn't want to. Too many memories frozen in time. But one morning, a courier dropped off an envelope at my office. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A formal notice. "We are requesting that you vacate the property known as the Whitaker Estate within 15 business days. As the estate now falls under corporate assets, occupancy must be reevaluated in accordance with the transition of ownership." Signed, Daniel Whitaker, on behalf of the Whitaker Family Trust. I stared at the page for a long time, my coffee going cold in my hand. He was trying to evict me from my childhood home. That was the breaking point. I drove there that afternoon. No call. No warning. Pulled up the long, winding driveway, gravel crunching beneath the tires. The hedges were still perfectly trimmed. Daniel's doing, I was sure. I knocked on the grand oak door. One of the new house staff answered, eyes wide when he saw me. "Mr. Whitaker, It's fine," I said. "Where's Daniel?" "In the sunroom." Of course he was. I walked through the house like a ghost revisiting his own grave. Everything was colder. The photos were gone, replaced by abstract art and modern sculptures. I reached the sunroom and found him lounging with a drink in hand, shirt unbuttoned, tin glowing like he'd just returned from Capri. Well, he said, not even standing. "Decided to come home after all?" "You sent me an eviction notice," I said. "This isn't your home." He sipped his drink, unfazed. It's not yours either. You may have the company, but this house belongs to the trust. And as co-beneficiaries, we get a say in its future. That's what the lawyers are for. You don't want the house, I said. You want me out. He smiled. You catch on quick. I took a step closer. Why, Daniel? Why does it matter so much to you? He finally looked up, and for a moment, the smirk faded. Because you didn't earn it. You were Dad's little project. The one he pitied. The deep thinker. You were always the shadow, and now suddenly you're standing in my light. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But that was before he added. And let's be honest. When you fail, I'll be there to clean up the mess. Just like I always have. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked the halls of the mansion until sunrise, memorizing every creak in the floorboards, every picture frame that had been replaced, every echo of a home that once was. And then, at dawn, I made a decision. If Daniel wanted war, I'd give it to him. But I wouldn't fight like he did. No rumors. No headlines. No shouting matches. I'd fight the way Dad taught me. Quietly. Thoroughly. With purpose. And I already had my first move. I left the mansion just after sunrise, not bothering to pack a bag. There was nothing there for me anymore. Every room had been scrubbed of the past, rebranded with Daniel and Marlene's sterile taste. My childhood bedroom was now a home gym. The wall where Dad used to mark my height with pencil notches. Painted over. Gone. Like I'd never existed. It felt like being erased in slow motion, and the worst part was, they didn't even try to hide it. I crashed at a motel that night. Cheap, musty, and lit with that sickly yellow glow that always feels a little too sad. I stared at the ceiling for hours, trying to remember the last thing Dad ever said to me face to face. Not the library talk, not the cryptic will discussion, just the last real thing. I think it was about a book. He handed me a copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, said, I think you'll like this. Read it slowly. I never did. It was still in my car. I opened it that night. Somewhere near the middle, underlined in my dad's handwriting, was a single sentence. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. I didn't understand it fully then, but I reread that line maybe 20 times before I finally slept. The next few weeks were the worst of my life. The board didn't trust me. Investors were jittery. Daniel and Marlene kept appearing in the press, subtly undermining me, suggesting the company was being steered by inexperience. Our stock dipped. Nothing catastrophic, but enough for analysts to circle like sharks. I'd wake up every morning to news alerts dissecting my every move, as if I was some out-of-place intern who accidentally sat in the CEO's chair. And then came the betrayal I didn't see coming. I had one ally on the board. Her name was Gloria Chun, late 60s, sharp as a tack, former VP of finance under my father. She'd been with the company for decades and was one of the few people who took me seriously. She invited me to lunch at a quiet bistro downtown. I thought it was just a catch-up. She slid a manila envelope across the table without making eye contact. Daniel's making a move, she said quietly. He's trying to call for a vote of no confidence. If he gets enough signatures, the board can vote you out. My throat tightened. He can't do that. The company's mine. She sighed. You own the majority stake, but the bylaws allow the board to appoint a temporary executive if they deem the current one harmful to operational stability. It was added after your father's heart scare to protect the company if he ever became incapacitated. My father, always thinking 3 steps ahead, except with Daniel. I opened the envelope. Meeting schedules, memos, emails between board members. Daniel had been laying the groundwork for weeks. Quiet lunches, promises of restructuring, hints that he'd bring back stability. I'm sorry, Luke, Gloria said. You have until the quarterly meeting to sway them. After that, well, let's just say I hope you have a parachute. That night, I went back to the motel and stared at myself in the mirror. Unshaven, eyes bloodshot. I looked more like a conspiracy theorist than a CEO. Daniel was winning. Again, I hit rock bottom that week. The pressure, the loneliness, the weight of a legacy I didn't ask for, it crushed me. I considered walking away, selling my shares, cutting my losses, disappearing somewhere quiet with my watch and a couple of books. But every time I thought about it, I'd hear his voice in my head. When you fail, I'll be there to clean up the mess. No, not like this. So I started over. Quietly. I moved into a small apartment above a bookstore. Nothing fancy, just a place with a view of the city and a working stove. I cooked my own meals, answered my own emails, did my own laundry for the first time in years. It felt grounding, like I was finally living on my own terms. I went to the office every day at 6 a.m. before anyone else arrived. I'd sit in Dad's old chair and just think, read through contracts, learn the ins and outs of every department. I shadowed the warehouse team, took a forklift certification course, attended shipping audits in person. I made it clear I wasn't just a name on the door. I was here to work. People noticed. It started small. A nod in the hallway. A barista who remembered my order. Gloria forwarding me memos before they reached Daniel. Then bigger things. The VP of Logistics asked if I'd review a new routing software proposal. The HR head invited me to the annual employee retreat. I even started a weekly Q&A session. No suits allowed, just casual talks with staff over bagels and coffee. I told them the truth, that I didn't have all the answers, that I was learning. But I promised them this. I cared, and I wasn't going anywhere. Then something incredible happened. One of the junior analysts, a kid named Dev with thick glasses and nervous energy, sent me an email with a subject line that just read, "Important?" Inside was a chart, a comparison between two supplier contracts. He'd discovered that a subsidiary Daniel had advised was using a shell vendor that overcharged by 18% and funneled the difference to a holding company registered in the Caymans. He even linked the bank account. It was in Marlene's name. My stomach dropped. I double-checked everything. Then again, it was real. Buried under layers of fake names and clever accounting, they were bleeding the company from the inside. Slowly, discreetly, but undeniably. And now, I had proof. I didn't react right away. I didn't confront Daniel. I didn't go to the press. I waited. I built a case. Quietly, carefully. I had Dev loop in a forensic accountant. Hired a private investigator to trace the shell companies. All off the books. By the end of the month, I had a folder thicker than the one the lawyer handed me after the will reading. But I still needed leverage. And I still needed time. So I played the long game. I invited Daniel to lunch. He showed up 30 minutes late, wearing sunglasses indoors and scrolling through his phone like I was the help. We ate in silence until he finally spoke. "You know, I've been thinking," he said. "You don't have to make this harder than it needs to be. Just take the golden parachute. Walk away. I'll make sure you're set for life." I sipped my water. Why would I do that? He smiled, leaned in. "Because you're not cut out for this. You're trying to wear Dad's shoes, but you never realized they were never yours to fill." I didn't respond. I just looked at him, long and hard. For the first time, I saw him clearly. Not as the golden child, not as my rival, but as a scared man clinging to something he didn't build. When lunch ended, I stood up, offered him a handshake. "Thanks for your honesty," I said. "I think it's time we both stopped pretending." And then I walked away, knowing exactly what was coming next. The quarterly board meeting. The vote of no confidence. The trap he didn't know I'd already set. The quarterly board meeting was scheduled for the second Tuesday of the month. That gave me exactly 21 days to set everything in motion. 21 days to prepare, align the right people, seal off escape routes, and make sure when the hammer fell, it fell hard. Not just on Daniel's schemes, but on every enabler who helped him build his little empire behind Dad's back. I wasn't driven by rage anymore. That had burned out in the motel room weeks ago. What I felt now was something colder, sharper, like the click of a chess clock when you know exactly how many moves it'll take to win. I didn't want chaos. I wanted precision. I wanted closure. And I wanted justice, real, public, and undeniable. The first move was Gloria. She was skeptical at first when I told her what I'd found. She'd been around long enough to know that claims like this could sink a company if handled recklessly. So I didn't show her everything, just enough to prove the connection between Daniel, Marlene, and the shell companies. She stared at the paper trail for a long time before finally whispering, "He's not just greedy. He's stupid." That was the opening I needed. I asked for her help, not just to protect me during the meeting, but to help clean house. We couldn't go public with this quietly. If Daniel was ousted without explanation, he'd spin it in the press. Say I panicked, or got jealous, or manipulated the board like I manipulated Dad. But if we brought proof, undeniable proof, and let the board confront him directly, that would be checkmate. Gloria agreed. Reluctantly at first, but she came around fast once I gave her a bigger vision, reclaiming the company's soul, returning it to what my father built. Not the polished version Daniel paraded at fundraisers, but the honest, hard-working legacy that gave warehouse workers benefits before it was trendy. She was old school, and somewhere deep down, she missed that version too. We began calling discreet meetings with allies on the board. People Dad had trusted, people Daniel had overlooked or insulted. People like Mr. Kaplan, who Daniel once called a dinosaur behind his back. Or Linda Marsh, the former COO, who Daniel tried to push into early retirement because he wanted fresh energy. We didn't tell them everything, just enough to plant doubt. We let them ask questions. Then we answered, slowly, methodically, and always with receipts. Next, I looped in Dev. He'd kept quiet so far, but the look in his eyes told me he was itching to see this through. I made it official. I promoted him, not just for the data he uncovered, but because he reminded me of who I was before all this. Quiet, overlooked, sharper than anyone realized. He helped me organize the evidence into a presentation so airtight it could survive a court hearing. Spreadsheets, transfers, shell company documentation, timestamps, all connected in a clean, logical flow, like a puzzle snapping together, piece by piece. We called it the diversion pipeline. At the same time, I started showing up more, not just in the office, but on-site at warehouses. I shook hands, asked questions, listened to grievances. People who barely remembered my name started waving when I walked past. One of the forklift drivers even handed me a coffee one morning and said, "It's good to see one of the Whitakers not wearing a scarf indoors." I laughed. So did he. Word was spreading. Maybe I wasn't just a placeholder after all. And that's when Daniel made his next move. He leaked an email to the press. A fake one. It looked like I was asking Gloria for help to hide losses in Q3. Sloppy formatting. Typos. And the signature? Sincerely, Luke Whitaker. I hadn't ended an email with sincerely since college applications. Still, it caused a stir. One outlet ran the headline, Whitaker CEO involved in Q3 accounting scandal. We responded fast. I issued a public statement and had our IT department trace the IP address where the email originated. It led back to a private Wi-Fi network registered to one of Daniel's old fraternity brothers. Gloria wanted to go to the board right then, but I told her no. Let him think we're on the back foot, I said. Let him overplay it. And he did. A week before the board meeting, Daniel arranged a family brunch at the estate. Said he wanted to clear the air before things got more hostile. Against every instinct I had, I agreed. I showed up wearing a black blazer and jeans. Casual, but deliberate. Daniel greeted me at the door like we were long-lost brothers. Marlene kissed my cheek like she hadn't spent the past 3 months publicly undermining me. Glad you came, Daniel said, pouring mimosas like we were celebrating a wedding. Let's not pretend this is anything but what it is, I replied. You wanted to feel in control before next week. He smirked. Control is earned, little brother. That's what you still don't get. We ate on the patio. Eggs Benedict. Fresh fruit. White linen napkins folded into perfect triangles. Daniel talked in vague terms about finding compromise, about how we could present a united front, about how some things are bigger than ego. Marlene nodded along, occasionally dabbing her mouth like a silent spectator at a play. Then Daniel leaned back and said something I'll never forget. You know, I used to think Dad gave you the company out of pity. But now, I think he gave it to you because he knew you'd mess it up. And then I'd swoop in and save it. That was his final lesson. I stared at him. Quiet. Controlled. Then I stood up. Thanks for brunch, I said. I look forward to seeing you Tuesday. He tilted his head. You sound confident. I met his gaze. I am. The next 3 days were a blur. We printed full binders for every board member. Black covers, gold lettering. Confidential. Internal Financial Review, 2017, present. Inside was the full diversion pipeline. Dev added a glossary for the legal terms, and Gloria wrote a foreword that could have passed for a New York Times op-ed. We also included a sealed envelope with a summary of Daniel's leaked fake email and the traced IP documentation. Then came the video. See, one of the PIs I'd hired had done more than trace accounts. He'd managed to get footage, real footage, of Daniel meeting with a known shell company broker. The kind of guy who wears gold rings on every finger and never pays with a credit card. The meeting took place in a golf club parking lot. The broker handed Daniel a sealed envelope. Daniel gave him a briefcase. We put the video on a USB. We labeled it Asset C, Supplementary Visual. Everything was ready. The night before the board meeting, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the fire escape of my apartment, looking down at the bookstore lights below. I thought of Dad. I thought of every moment Daniel had humiliated me. Every smirk, every dig, every time he pretended the empire was already his. I thought about what it meant to finally stop being the quiet son and start being the man my father hoped I'd become. Then I went back inside, pressed my shirt, polished my shoes, and slept like a stone. Because tomorrow was Judgment Day. The boardroom was quiet. Not the kind of quiet you get before a meeting starts. Nervous, chatty, full of rustling papers and clinking coffee cups. This was different. Heavy. Still. The kind of silence that settles over a courtroom just before the verdict. No one made eye contact. No one touched their coffee. The only sound was the soft hum of the ceiling fan overhead, spinning like it had no idea what was about to happen. I sat at the head of the table. Calm. Composed. Wearing the same watch my dad gave me when I turned 16, the one Daniel always mocked. Gloria was to my right, her expression unreadable. On my left, Dev sat with a small laptop and a notepad, looking 10 years older than he had a month ago. Across the table sat the rest of the board, 12 men and women, most of whom had come into this meeting expecting a showdown. And then there was Daniel. Late, of course. He always did love a dramatic entrance. He walked in wearing a navy three-piece suit, hair perfect, smile plastered on like he was posing for a magazine cover. Marlene was right behind him, draped in designer black, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. She looked more like she was attending a funeral than a corporate meeting. They took their seats without saying a word. I cleared my throat. Let's begin. The first 30 minutes were standard protocol. Financials, projections, logistics reports. Boring on purpose. I wanted Daniel to get comfortable, to let his guard down, to start thinking maybe this was just another day. Maybe I was bluffing. Then I handed out the binders. Before we move forward, I said, I'd like to introduce a special report, an internal review of certain financial irregularities discovered over the past 6 quarters. Daniel froze with his water glass halfway to his mouth. Gloria handed out the final binder. Dev plugged in the USB and dimmed the lights. The flat screen behind me flickered to life. We call it the diversion pipeline, I said. It outlines a series of transactions involving shell vendors and inflated supplier costs, ultimately funneling funds into a Cayman Islands holding company. The first slide popped up, a clean flowchart of the diverted funds. Then a list of fake vendors. Then a timeline. Every dollar. Every signature. Every date. Daniel laughed. Actually laughed. You can't be serious. You think I had something to do with that? I don't think. I replied, turning to the next slide. I know. Then I opened the sealed envelope. Ladies and gentlemen, Gloria said, picking up from me. This is a forensic analysis tracing the financial trail back to a joint account registered under Marlene Whitaker's name. The same account used to make several luxury purchases and pay out bonuses to unregistered entities. The room shifted. Chairs squeaked. Throats cleared. Daniel's face dropped a shade. Then came the final blow. Dev clicked to the video. The parking lot footage. Daniel accepting the envelope. The handshake. The briefcase. Silence again. Daniel stood up. This is illegal. This is entrapment. You don't get to spy on me. No one spied, I said. The footage came from the golf club's security system. We subpoenaed it yesterday. Turns out one of their board members is also on ours. Marlene finally spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper. You said it was offshore for tax reasons. Daniel spun toward her. You told me to. No, I cut in. Don't do that. Don't drag her down with you. This was your show. He turned back to me, face contorting between disbelief and rage. You don't get to do this. You're just a kid with a philosophy degree and a dead dad's name. This company is mine, was always mine. I stood. No, Daniel. It never was. I looked around the room. As acting CEO and majority shareholder, I'm calling for an immediate vote to remove Daniel Whitaker from all positions of influence within Whitaker Global Logistics, pending formal investigation. The evidence has been submitted to our legal counsel and, as of this morning, to the SEC. Gasps. Real ones this time. I further move that the board initiate proceedings to recover embezzled funds and sever any remaining financial ties with the Whitaker Family Trust, which, effective immediately, will be dissolved as a controlling interest. One by one, the board members opened their binders, reviewed the signatures. The votes began. I, I, I. 12 voices. Unanimous. Daniel collapsed back into his chair, staring at the table like it had betrayed him. Marlene didn't say another word. She just stood up slowly and walked out without looking at anyone. It was done. Afterward, I stayed behind in the boardroom. Just me and Dev. You okay? He asked. I nodded. Yeah, just tired. He paused. Do you think he really thought he'd win? I looked at the empty chair Daniel had left behind. He thought the world owed him something, I said. He just forgot who built it. The fallout was swift. News broke the next morning. Whitaker Empire cleans house. Stepbrother ousted in fraud scandal. The media turned fast. Daniel became the villain of the week, face plastered across screens with headlines about betrayal, greed, and the golden boy gone wrong. The SEC opened a formal investigation. So did the IRS. The shell companies were shut down. The diverted funds were traced, seized, and returned. Several lower-level execs were implicated and removed. Marlene issued a public statement claiming she was misled and deeply saddened. No one bought it. She disappeared from the social scene completely. Daniel tried to fight it. Hired lawyers. Filed appeals. But the evidence was too clean. Too thorough. Everything folded like a cheap poker hand. Within 6 months, he filed for bankruptcy. The guest house was sold. The sports cars repossessed. I heard he moved to a condo in Miami and was trying to rebrand as a consultant. I didn't care. I wasn't watching him anymore. I was too busy rebuilding. We restructured the company from the ground up. New ethics policies, profit-sharing programs, community outreach. We started scholarships in my father's name, real ones, for kids like Dev who'd been overlooked. I moved out of the apartment above the bookstore and bought a small house near the lake. Quiet, peaceful. I kept the watch. Still wore it every day. But now, when I looked at it, I didn't feel like I was holding on to something I'd lost. I felt like I was carrying it forward. One day, I walked into Dad's old office, now mine, and found a letter tucked in the back of the safe. It was dated 6 months before he died. Luke, if you're reading this, then it means I was right. I know this won't be easy, but I also know you're stronger than you think. You see people clearly. You listen. You care. That's leadership, not the loudest voice, but the quietest conviction. The company is yours because the legacy is yours. Build it well. And don't forget to rest now and then. P.S. You were always my favorite. But don't tell your brother. Dad. I smiled, folded the letter, put it in my jacket pocket. Then I got back to work. Because some legacies aren't inherited. They're earned. And this time, no one was taking it from me.